I want to start by telling you that I am not a person who notices things. That's not false modesty. It's the most honest thing I can say about myself, and it matters more than anything else in what I'm about to tell you. Because the entire reason I'm sitting at this table, writing this out by hand, not typing, writing so that it exists in one place and can be given to one person, is that I spent 11 months in a building that required noticing, and I was not built for it, and I survived anyway. And I want to make sure the person coming after me has a better start than I did. My name doesn't matter. The town doesn't matter. What matters is the building and the sheet and what the sheet means. And I'm going to get there. I'm going to get there carefully because that's the only way to do it right. Here's what I'll tell you up front, so you don't spend the first half of this wondering if I'm going somewhere. The attendance sheet is real. It is updated every night. It lists names of students who are physically present in that building when I arrive at 11 p.m. And some of those students have been on that sheet for longer than the building has had electricity. I have seen the sheet. I have read the names. I have, on one occasion, made the mistake of trying to verify one of them, and I'm going to tell you exactly what happened, exactly what I should have done instead, and exactly what you should do instead when it's your turn. Because it will be your turn. That's why I'm writing this. The job was listed as a custodial position, overnight shift, at something called the Halverson Adult Learning Annex. If you search for it, you'll find a single-page county website that hasn't been updated since the previous decade, a listed phone number that rings 4 times and disconnects, and a physical address on the western edge of a mid-sized town that I'm going to call Greer. Because it isn't Greer, but it feels like Greer. And if you know Greer, you'll understand the texture I'm reaching for, a place that is neither small enough to be intimate, nor large enough to be anonymous. A place where the county still runs things it probably shouldn't still be running. I applied because I needed the work, and because the pay was $11 an hour above what I'd been making at the warehouse, and because the listing said no prior experience required, uniforms provided, schedule consistent, that last part. I have a kid at home. A consistent schedule was the thing I needed more than anything else, and I want to say that clearly because I think it's important that you understand I wasn't drawn to this job by curiosity or by something atmospheric or by a feeling. I was drawn by a wage and a schedule, which is the reason most people take most jobs, and which is the thing the building relies on. The hiring process was a single in-person meeting in a county administrative office, 4 blocks from the annex itself. The woman who interviewed me was named Pat, and Pat was in her early 60s, and Pat had the specific energy of someone who has been doing paperwork for a public institution for so long that she has become fused with the paperwork in some cellular way. She did not look at me the way a person looks at another person during a conversation. She looked at her forms while I spoke and occasionally made small marks. At the end, she said the following, word for word, because I wrote it down in the parking lot immediately after. The position requires punctuality above all. 11 p.m. entry, 6 a.m. departure, no early exit. The building will provide everything you need. You don't bring your own equipment. You use what's in the utility closet on the first floor, which is stocked every evening before you arrive. You follow the nightly task sheet, which will be left on the cart. You do not deviate from the task sheet. Questions? I said no. She handed me a badge on a lanyard and a single laminated card with an entry code on it. And that was the hiring process. I started the following Monday. The building is 4 stories. I want you to understand the building the way I came to understand it, which is physically and spatially before anything else, because the building's layout is not incidental to what happens there. It's structural. Everything that happens in that building is organized around its architecture in a way that took me months to understand, and that I could have understood in my first week if anyone had explained it plainly. I'm going to try to be the person who explains it plainly. The first floor is administrative, a reception desk that is always unstaffed when I arrive. A row of locked office doors, a staff break room that I was told I could use, and that I eventually stopped using for reasons I'll explain. The utility closet is at the end of the first floor hallway, next to the stairwell door, and it is, as Pat said, always stocked when I arrive. Cart, mop, bucket, 2 spray bottles, a roll of black bags, a stack of clean rags. Always the same. I don't know who stocks it. I've never arrived early enough to see them, and I've thought about it more than I should have. The second floor is classrooms, 6 of them, numbered 201 through 206, plus a single unlocked restroom at the north end of the hall, and a water fountain that has never worked in any of the 11 months I've been there. The classrooms are used during the day for what I understand to be adult literacy programming. That's what the county website says anyway. Adult literacy and GED preparation. The desks are the small kind with the attached writing surfaces that tip up. The kind you think of as elementary school furniture that never quite went away. And they are arranged in 3 rows of 8 in each classroom, and they are almost always in different configurations when I arrive than they were when I left, which I noticed early and stopped mentioning because no one asked. The third floor is offices, again mostly locked. A computer lab with 12 stations, a room labelled records that is always locked and that I clean around by mopping the hallway, wiping the exterior door handle and moving on. I have never been inside the records room. I have never been asked to go inside the records room. The one time I tested the handle not to enter, just to test the door, gave a 1/4 inch and then held, and something on the other side rustled, and I put the handle back and mopped the hallway and have not tested it since. The 4th floor is where I want to slow down, because the 4th floor is where the sheet is. The 4th floor has no classrooms. It has a long carpeted hallway, the only carpeted space in the building, and 3 rooms. The first is a kind of library or reading room with low shelves and round tables and better lighting than anywhere else in the building. Warm and amber rather than the fluorescent white of the lower floors. The second is a small chapel or meditation room, non-denominational, with a dozen cushioned chairs arranged in a circle and a single narrow window that looks east. I was told to clean both of these rooms as needed, which I took to mean when they looked like they needed it, which was infrequently. They were tidy rooms. They didn't accumulate the ordinary debris of occupied spaces. The third room on the 4th floor has no label on its door. Its door is always open when I arrive. Its door is always open when I leave. I have never seen it closed. Inside is a single desk, a single chair, and on the desk a clipboard. On the clipboard, an attendance sheet. I was told during my very first shift by the woman I'll call Deb, the woman who showed me around on my first night, and who I'll get to, that I should not touch the clipboard. I should not move the clipboard. I should dust around the clipboard. I should empty the small wastebasket under the desk, which I do, though the wastebasket has never once contained anything, and I should note, in my own task log, that I have visited the room. That's it, that's all. Note the visit, don't touch the sheet, close nothing. I want to tell you about Deb now, because Deb is the reason I know anything. Deb was the other member of the night crew when I started. There are always 2 people on the night crew. I learned this not from Pat during the hiring interview, but from Deb during the first shift. And the distinction matters because it means the 2-person structure is a working reality, not an administrative formality. Deb had been at the Halverson Annex for 3 years before I arrived, and she was the person who handed off the cart to me and walked me through the building floor by floor, and she said almost nothing during that first walkthrough except for 2 things that I wrote down later. The first thing she said, "The task sheet is the job. Don't make up extra work." The second thing she said, standing in the doorway of the 4th floor room with no label, looking at the clipboard on the desk but not pointing at it, "That's not yours." I said, "Okay, whose is it?" She said, "The building's," and then she moved on down the hall, and I followed her, And that was the end of the orientation. I want to tell you that I pressed her for more. I want to tell you that I immediately recognized the strangeness of that answer and pursued it with intelligence and persistence. But what actually happened is that I decided she was being cryptically territorial about a clipboard, because some people are like that about their routines, and I filed it under institutional eccentricity and got on with the work. I was there for a paycheck. I mopped floors, I emptied waste baskets, I wiped down whiteboards in the second floor classrooms, and restocked the paper towel dispensers in the bathrooms, and ran the vacuum over the fourth floor carpet on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And the building was clean. And I went home at 6 a.m. and slept until noon and picked up my kid from school. And for the first 3 weeks, that was the whole thing. Deb and I did not talk much. She worked the first and third floors while I worked the second and fourth, and then we switched halfway through the shift, and we passed each other in the stairwell around 2 a.m. every night, and she would nod, and I would nod, and occasionally one of us would mention something practical. The mop head needs replacing, or 202 has gum under 3 of the desks again. And that was the extent of our communication. She was not unfriendly. She was not cold. She was simply a person who had found a workable relationship with the building and saw no reason to disturb it with conversation. The routine settled into my body the way routines do when you work the same hours in the same space long enough. I stopped having to think about the sequence of rooms. I stopped checking the task sheet after the first week because the task sheet never varied. I developed the specific, half-attentive focus of someone doing physical labor in a familiar environment, present enough to do the job, absent enough to let the hours pass. I listened to nothing on my phone. The building had its own ambient sound that I had come to prefer, or at least tolerate. The low hum of the HVAC system, the occasional tick of the building settling, the faint sound of my own footsteps on the linoleum, the specific silence of the fourth floor carpet swallowing my steps entirely. 3 weeks in, I noticed the attendance sheet for the first time. I want to be precise about this because the way I noticed it matters. I was not looking for it. I was not curious about it. I walked into the unlabeled fourth floor room to empty the wastebasket, which took approximately 15 seconds, and on my way out, I glanced at the desk the way you glance at any surface when you're cleaning around it, a quick visual survey for anything out of place, and I saw the clipboard clearly for the first time. It was an ordinary clipboard, tan, the standard institutional size with a metal spring clip at the top. The paper in it was a standard single sheet, the kind of ruled attendance grid you'd recognize from any school or meeting. A column of names on the left, a grid of dates running across the top, and small check marks or initials filled into the boxes. The grid ran far enough to the right that the dates at the far edge of the sheet were too small to read without leaning in. There were, by my rough count from the doorway, between 30 and 40 names. I didn't lean in. I emptied the wastebasket and left. But that night, descending the stairs back to the first floor, I realized what I'd seen wasn't consistent with what I'd been told about the building. Adult literacy programming, ED prep. According to the county website, the Halverson Annex served roughly 60 to 80 students annually across all its programs, which was a reasonable number. But the classrooms I cleaned every night held the physical evidence of active use arranged desks, whiteboard markings that needed erasing, occasional personal items left on chairbacks, or in the tray beneath the writing surface. The classrooms felt used. The fourth floor did not feel used. The fourth floor felt, and I'm going to use this word carefully, maintained. There's a difference between a room that is used and cleaned and a room that is maintained. A used room has the residue of human activity. A maintained room has the residue of attention. The fourth floor reading room, the meditation room, and the unlabeled room with the clipboard all felt like spaces that were tended, not occupied, tended. I mentioned this to Deb the following night during our 2 a.m. stairwell crossing. I said, casually, that the 4th floor felt different from the rest of the building. She stopped walking. She didn't turn around. She was 1 step below me on the stairs, heading down. She stopped and held the railing and said, without looking at me, "Different how?" I said I didn't know. Quieter, maybe. Less like the classrooms, she said. The 4th floor has a different population. I waited for her to say more. She didn't. She continued down the stairs and I followed, and we went back to our respective floors, and I spent the next hour trying to figure out what she meant by population in a building where I had never once, in 3 weeks of overnight work, seen another human being. The first time I looked directly at the attendance sheet was in early November, roughly 6 weeks into the job. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't investigative instinct. It was that I'd been awake for 22 hours that particular day my kid was sick. I'd barely slept. I was running on bad coffee and stubbornness, and somewhere around 3 in the morning, standing in the unlabeled room on the 4th floor, I made the decision that I was going to sit in the chair at the desk for 5 minutes before finishing the floor. Just rest, just sit. I sat. The room was very quiet. The building's ambient hum was lower on the 4th floor than anywhere else, and sitting there with the overhead fluorescent off, I'd turned it off out of some instinct. For dim and quiet, that I could feel the building around me in a different way than I could feel it when I was moving through it, and the clipboard was directly in front of me. I read it. The sheet was titled in small block print at the top, Enrolled, Continuing. Beneath that, 2 columns, name and duration, then the grid. The names were ordinary, the kind you'd see on any class roster anywhere in America. Marcus W. Celeste O. Hank D. A few full last names, most truncated, 41 names in total. I counted. The duration column, rather than containing dates, contained numbers. Some were single digits, some were double digits. One was 112. I understood immediately that 112 was not several days. Classes don't run for 112 days. And even if they did, this attendance sheet was too small and too tidy to be 112 days of marks. I looked at the grid columns and saw that they weren't dated. They were blank at the top, ruled, gridded, filled in with check marks, but no dates, which meant the numbers in the duration column were not days, and were not weeks, and were not, I looked at the names again, at the accumulated marks stretching across the columns to the very edge of the paper months. I put the clipboard down. I stood up. I finished the floor. On my way down the stairs, I passed Deb going up, which was unusual. She normally stayed on the lower floors at that hour. She looked at me. She didn't say anything, but she looked at me in a way that was different from her usual nod, and I have thought about that look many times since. It was not alarmed. It was not suspicious. It was assessing. The look of someone taking a measurement. I went home. I slept. I came back. I want to describe the classrooms more carefully now because for the first 6 weeks I treated them as generic institutional space, and I was wrong to do that. And the second phase of my time in the building began with paying attention to the classrooms, the way I should have been paying attention to them from the start. The classrooms on the 2nd floor are, as I said, used. They show the wear of consistent occupation, but the occupation has a texture that I started noticing after I'd read the sheet to specificity. In room 201, the front left desk had a groove worn into the writing surface where something had been pressed and dragged repeatedly, an arc like someone tracing the same shape over and over across many sessions. In room 203, 3 desks were always angled slightly away from the main grid of the room. Always the same 3 desks, pulled back as though whoever sat in them preferred more space. In room 205, the back wall had a chalk drawing that appeared on the 1st of every month. Not a permanent drawing, just a monthly appearance, always erased by the 1st night of the following month. Sometimes simple, a circle, an arrow, a tree shape, sometimes more elaborate. I noted all of this in my personal notebook, not in the task log. The task log was strictly functional surfaces cleaned, supplies restocked, waste removed. My notebook was where I put observation. I want to be clear about something. I never saw who used those classrooms. I worked from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. Whatever happened in those classrooms happened during the day, presumably, or in the very early evening. I have no direct evidence of another human being in that building during my shift, and yet the classrooms were used, consistently, specifically, in ways that repeated with enough regularity to suggest not just a population of students, but specific individuals with individual habits, individual preferences, individual marks left on specific desks, 41 names, continuing enrollment, durations ranging from 11 to 112. In early December, I mentioned the drawing on the wall of room 205 to Deb. I described it that month. It was an elongated figure, almost a letter, but not quite any letter I recognized, drawn in green chalk about 2 feet tall. Deb said, "Did you erase it?" I said no. It wasn't on the task sheet. She said, "Don't erase it. Don't add to it. Don't respond to it." I said, "Respond." She looked at me. "Don't draw anything back." This was December, 3 months into the job, and it was the most direct piece of instruction I'd received from Deb since the first night, and I recognized it as such, and I said, "Okay, I won't draw anything back." And I went back to my floor, and I did not draw anything back, and I did not add to the drawing, and I did not erase it. And the drawing was gone 4 days later, and replaced on the 1st of January with a different drawing, a series of concentric circles, the smallest barely a handspan, drawn in the same green chalk, and I did not touch it, and did not respond to it, and it was gone by the 4th day, and I never touched it. What Deb gave me that night, and what she gave me in every subsequent sideways instruction over the following months, was not information. It was navigation. She was not explaining the building to me. She was giving me correct behavior ahead of the cost of incorrect behavior, and the distinction matters enormously, and I'm trying very hard to give you the same thing. The records room on the 3rd floor. I told you I tested the handle once. I told you what happened. I want to tell you the full sequence because I've minimized it by only describing the physical part. It was late January. I'd been at the building for about 10 weeks. I had developed the habit of finishing the 3rd floor hallway quickly. It required less work than the 2nd floor, fewer surfaces, fewer rooms to tend, and filling the extra time by sitting in the hallway near the water fountain that didn't work and writing in my notebook. One of those nights I was writing about the attendance sheet, specifically about the duration numbers, trying to work out what unit of time they represented, and I had convinced myself they must be months, despite my earlier dismissal of that possibility, because even a year and a half wasn't impossible for a continuing education program, and the door to the records room made a sound, not a knock, not a scrape, a sound like someone adjusting their position in a chair, a creak of weight redistributed, coming from the other side of a door I had always been told was locked. In a room I had never been asked to enter, I got up. I want to tell you I got up slowly and calmly, but what I actually did was stand up fast and knock my water bottle off the windowsill and catch it before it hit the floor, and stand in the hallway for a moment with my heart running. And then, because I had been in the building long enough that certain instincts had started to form even if I hadn't articulated them, I put my water bottle back on the windowsill, opened my notebook to a blank page and wrote at the top, "Records room, wait sound, 1:47 a.m. And I stood in the hallway and listened. It didn't repeat. After 5 minutes I walked to the door and stood next to it without touching it. The silence from inside was a different quality of silence than the hallway silence, denser, more deliberate, the way silence gets when someone in the other room has realized they've been heard and is holding still. I reached out and touched the handle. It turned a 1/4 inch. Held. From the other side, the rustle. I let go of the handle. I went back to the first floor and told Deb what happened, and she listened to the whole thing and then said, "Don't test the handles, walk past. Walk normally." I said, "Is there something in that room?" She said, "There are things in all the rooms, that's the building." And then, quietly, almost to herself rather than to me, "They can tell the difference between cleaning and curiosity." I wrote that down. I want to tell you about the night in February when I made my serious mistake, because this is the part of the story that is most instructive and the part I find hardest to write. Not because it was the most frightening thing that happened. It wasn't. Actually, what happened in February was quiet and slow and took about 4 hours to fully register, which made it worse in a particular way that I'm still thinking about. It began with a name on the attendance sheet. I had been reading the sheet periodically, not every night, not on a schedule, but occasionally when I was in the room to empty the wastebasket and the light was right and the impulse was there. I had begun to know the names the way you come to know the names of people you've heard about, but never met. Marcus W., Celeste O., Hank D. had become familiar presences in my understanding of the building, even though they were nothing more than names on a laminated page. I had worked out, by then, that the duration numbers were most likely years. I had done this by finding a worn paperback left on one of the reading room tables on the 4th floor, with a name written inside the front cover, Celeste O., and a year, and I had done the subtraction, and the number in the duration column next to Celeste O's name was 17. And the year in the book was enough years ago that 17 years was possible, and I had sat with that for a long time. Continuing enrollment, 17 years. In February there was a new name on the sheet, at the bottom of the list, below all the others. The ink looked different, fresher, more saturated than the older entries. The name was a full name rather than an initial truncated one. Daniel Reyes. Duration 0. Not a blank, a 0. Written in the same ink. I looked at Daniel Reyes's name for longer than I should have, and then I went home, and before I slept, I searched for Daniel Reyes in the county's public adult education enrollment records, which are available through the county's online portal. I found him. He had enrolled in the Halverson Annex's adult literacy program 4 days before I found his name on the sheet. He had listed a local address. The enrollment record included a phone number. I did not call the phone number. I want to be honest. The only reason I didn't call was that it was 6:30 in the morning, and I was exhausted and told myself I'd decide whether to call after I slept. When I woke up in the early afternoon, the feeling that had made me want to call had shifted into something else, something more like dread, and I didn't call. I went back to work that night. When I reached the 4th floor room, emptied the wastebasket, and looked at the sheet, Daniel Reyes's name had moved. Not to a different position on the list, the name itself had moved up. 11 positions. He was now 11th from the bottom rather than last. The names that had previously occupied the positions above his had shifted down. The total number of names on the sheet was still 41. I stood there for a long time. I went to find Deb. She was on the 2nd floor. I came down the stairs and found her in the hallway outside 203, standing with her mop handle upright. Not mopping, just standing. She looked at me when I appeared at the top of the stairwell, and she said, "You looked someone up?" Not a question, a statement of fact. I said yes. She said, "Did you contact them?" I said no. She let out a breath. She said, Don't anyone up. Don't make contact. Don't bring any of them out of the building." I said, "Out of the building? What does that mean?" She said, "The sheet is the buildings. The names on the sheet are the buildings. Your interest in them is the building's business, not yours. When you pull a name out into the world, you pull on something that's attached to something else. You understand?" I said I thought I did. She said, "You don't yet, but you will." I want to talk about Deb herself now, because I've been positioning her as a source of lateral instruction, and I haven't told you who she was to me, and that matters for this to land correctly. Deb was not my friend exactly. We were colleagues in the specific way that overnight workers in shared buildings are colleagues, a relationship built on proximity and mutual low-stakes trust rather than chosen affinity. But she was, over those 11 months, the most consistently reliable person in my life. That is a thing you can say about someone without it being a declaration of closeness. She was reliable. She was precise. She did not dramatize, and she did not minimize. And when she told me something, it was because the information was necessary, rather than because she wanted to talk. And in a building like the Halverson Annex, that quality was its own form of protection. In March, Deb told me she was leaving. Not leaving immediately, giving 2 months, she said, which seemed formal for a custodial job and which I later understood was a real operational requirement, not a social nicety. She said it to me the same way she said everything standing in the stairwell, on her way to somewhere else, as a statement of fact appended to a practical transition. "You'll need to know a few more things before I go," she said. "I'll tell you when the time is right." I asked when the time would be right. She said, "When you stop asking," which I took to mean when you've stopped needing the information explained and started being able to receive it directly. And I think she was right. There was a version of me who had arrived at the Halverson Annex in October looking for a paycheck and a consistent schedule, and that version of me needed everything explained from the ground up. By March, I had spent 5 months in the building, and I had accumulated enough direct experience of the building's logic that I was no longer operating on explanation. I was operating on calibration. I knew things about the building, the way you know things about a place you live, not theoretically, but physically, in your gait and your habits and your choices. I stopped asking. Deb started telling. The things Deb told me, across the 2 months before she left, were not delivered as a list or a set of rules. They came in fragments attached to moments, the way all genuine instruction comes. I'm going to give them to you as a list here because the list form is the right form for this document, and because Deb spent 3 years assembling them, and you should have them assembled from the start. Do not go into any room on the 4th floor after 3 a.m. Not the reading room, not the meditation room, not the unlabeled room. You may finish your 4th floor work before 3 if you manage your time correctly. If you don't finish by 3, leave what's unfinished and come back the following night. The task sheet will not reflect this. No one will flag it. Leave before 3. Do not erase the chalk drawings in room 205. Do not add to them. Do not photograph them. Do not describe them to anyone outside the building. Do not think about what they mean while you're in the building. Wait until you're home in daylight, and then think about them if you need to. But don't carry the question into the building because the building can feel the quality of your attention. Do not look up names from the attendance sheet. Do not search for them. Do not think of them as people you could contact. They are enrolled. Their enrollment is the building's concern. Your job is to clean around the fact of their enrollment and leave the enrollment undisturbed. Do not test any door handle on the 3rd floor. You clean the hallway. You clean the accessible rooms. You do not investigate locked rooms. Curiosity is a form of interference in this building, and interference has a cost, and the cost comes slowly and from a direction you won't expect. The wastebasket in the 4th floor unlabeled room must be emptied every night, even when it contains nothing. The act of emptying matters more than the contents. This is the only maintenance act that is strictly mandatory rather than responsive. Do not skip it. If you hear your name spoken in the building, do not respond, not unless you can see the face of the person speaking. The building has learned your name by now. It doesn't mean harm to use it. but responding confirms something you don't want confirmed. The cart must be returned to the utility closet by 5:45 a.m. at the latest. Not because of policy, because the building needs the closet to be empty before 6. You don't need to understand why. Just be back by 5:45. There are 2 more things Deb told me, and they're more complex. And I want to give them more space. The first is about the population. I asked Deb in April what she believed was happening to the students in the classrooms. Not the students on the sheet, the students whose desks showed use, whose chalk drawings appeared on the wall of 205, whose habits I had come to know without ever meeting them. I had by then spent 6 months cleaning around the evidence of their presence, without ever encountering them, and the question had moved from intellectual curiosity to something more like concern. Deb thought for a moment before answering, which was unusual. She normally answered immediately. Then she said, "I think some of them came here to learn something and found something else also on offer. And I think the ones on the sheet accepted the other offer, not because they were tricked, because what was on offer was something they wanted." I asked what was on offer. She said, "More time inside something that made sense to them. More time in a place that held their attention completely. People spend their whole lives looking for a place like that." I thought about the duration column. The zeros are becoming numbers, becoming double digits. 112. I said, "Aren't they trapped?" Deb said, "I don't know. I've never been able to ask them. Neither have you. That's not an accident." She let that sit. Then, "What I know is that the building takes care of them. The classrooms are used. The attendance is kept. Whatever they're doing in there, they're doing it. My job, and now your job, is to maintain the physical space around that in a way that doesn't disturb it." "Custodial," I said, meaning it both ways. She looked at me. "Exactly right," she said. The second thing she told me was about the person before her, the person Deb replaced when she started. Deb did not give me this person's name, I believe deliberately. She said only that there had been someone before her. As there had been someone before that person, as there was presumably someone before all of them, and that the transition had always been a 2-month overlap, where the leaving person transmitted the working knowledge to the incoming person. She said she did not know how long the building had operated this way. She said she suspected it was longer than the building's current electrical configuration, longer than the Halverson Annex's name, longer than the county's administrative existence. She said, "The building needs 2 people, not 1. I don't know why 2 specifically, but the single time in 3 years that I was alone in the building, you had the flu. Remember, the week in February, I could feel the difference. Something stretched, like a held breath. I remembered. I had called out sick for 3 nights and came back on the 4th. And Deb had looked at me when I arrived and said good in a tone that was more than just work relief. She said, "You need to find someone to overlap with you. Don't advertise the job Pat handles hiring, and Pat will place someone when the time comes. But it's your job to recognize the right person when they arrive and start the overlap immediately. Don't wait. The building doesn't give you a long window." I asked how I'd recognize the right person. She said, "They won't ask you why things are the way they are. They'll ask you what they should do." I thought about my first week, about the questions I had asked, whether I had asked why or what to do. I honestly couldn't remember. Deb left the 2nd week of May. We did a last full walkthrough of the building together on her last night, floor by floor, and she pointed at things without explaining them, the way you point at things in a space you're handing over, a gesture of orientation more than instruction, a physical transfer of familiarity. The 4th floor unlabeled room, the attendance sheet, and the wastebasket, the chalk drawing in 205, which that month was a simple horizontal line bisected by a short vertical across without the religious valence, just the geometry. The locked records room door. The closet on the 1st floor is stocked and ready, At 5:40 in the morning, standing in the first floor lobby, she handed me the mop handle, not the cart, just the handle, a piece of the equipment she'd used every night for 3 years, and said, "You're good at this, better than you think." Then she walked out the door, and I stood in the lobby alone, and I looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then I went back to work. The 6 weeks between Deb leaving and my new partner arriving were the longest 6 weeks of the job. I want to be honest about that. The building without Deb in it was the same tasks, the same sheet, the same chalk drawings, the same sounds, but I felt what she had described, something stretched, a held breath, not threatening, not hostile, just the particular quality of insufficient staffing. The building needed 2 people and was running on 1, and everything I did was fractionally less settled than it had been. I cleaned more carefully. I was punctual in ways that went beyond my ordinary punctuality, arriving 5 minutes before 11, leaving precisely at 6, emptying the 4th floor wastebasket every single night without exception. I read the attendance sheet when I needed to, which was less frequently than before because I had stopped needing to read it in order to understand it. I knew the names the way I knew the layout of the building. I carried them as spatial knowledge. Daniel Reyes was now 8th from the bottom. His duration column had changed from 0 to 2. I don't know if that was months. I don't know if it was years. I know it was no longer 0. The person Pat sent me was named Theo, and Theo arrived on a Monday evening in mid-June. He was younger than me, mid-20s, wearing a worn jacket over the provided uniform shirt, because he'd put it on without adjusting anything, and it hadn't quite closed all the way. He looked at the building the way people look at large institutional buildings when they're nervous, taking in the scale before the details. He shook my hand. He said, "I'd be working with you." She said you'd explain how it works. I said yes. I asked if he had questions. He said, "Just what I should do?" I handed him the mop handle. We walked through the building floor by floor. Teaching Theo was different from being taught by Deb, and I want to say something carefully about that difference. When Deb was teaching me, I was receiving information I didn't have the context to fully absorb. I was filing things under institutional eccentricity and Deb's personal system, because I didn't yet have the experiential frame to hold what she was telling me in its correct shape, which meant Deb had to tell me some things more than once, in more than one form, and had to time certain information until I was ready to hold it. I understand that now. With Theo, what I found was that I didn't have to explain much. I would say something once, "Don't test the handles on the 3rd floor," and he would nod in a way that meant he'd already felt the logic of it, already sensed the architecture of the rule even before I'd named it. He was not incurious. Theo was observant in ways that I had not been in my first months, noticing things about the classrooms that had taken me weeks to notice, but his curiosity was the kind that operated inside whatever structure was already present, rather than pulling against it. On his 3rd night, he stopped in the doorway of the 4th floor unlabeled room and looked at the attendance sheet for a long time without touching it or stepping inside. Then he looked at me and said, "How long have some of these been here?" I said I thought some of them had been here for a very long time. He said, "Are they okay?" I stood there for a second, because that was not a question I had ever been able to answer. And it was not a question Deb had answered for me, and it was not a question the building would answer. But I thought about what Deb had said. The building takes care of them. And I thought about the chalk drawings and the worn groove in the desk in 201, and the consistent arrangement of the 3 angled desks in 203 and the warm amber light in the reading room, and the specificity of a space that held 41 people's ongoing presence with enough precision to maintain their individual habits across however many years. And I said, "I think they're doing what they came here to do." Theo thought about this. He said, "That's the best answer." And then he stepped back from the doorway and moved on down the hall. And I followed him. and we finished the 4th floor and came down the stairs at 2:58 a.m. I have been at the Halverson Annex for 11 months. I'm going to give my 2 months' notice to Pat next week. I have already decided this, and I'm telling you so you understand that this document isn't written from a position of entrapment or distress. I'm leaving because my kids' school schedule is changing, and the overnight hours don't serve us the way they used to. That's all. The building is fine. The building will continue. Theo is ready, but I'm writing this to you, specifically, because Pat called me last Thursday and said she'd had an inquiry about the position, and the person who inquired had asked the right kind of question, not what are the requirements, and not does the schedule match my availability, but what does the work actually involve? And Pat, in her way, had said, the current staff will explain it, and she had given the person Theo's shift contact information, and also, for reasons I don't fully understand, but have learned to trust, my name. And if you are reading this, it's because Theo has already given it to you, which means he has decided you're the right person, which means you've already passed the part of this that involves other people deciding things about you. So let me tell you what the work actually involves. The building is 4 floors. The first floor is administrative. The second floor is classrooms. The third floor is offices and records. The 4th floor is different from the others, maintained rather than used, tended rather than occupied, and it requires a different quality of attention than the other floors. You will develop this quality of attention naturally over time. Don't try to accelerate it. The attendance sheet in the 4th floor unlabeled room is not yours. Do not handle it, photograph it, or carry its information outside the building. You may read it. Reading is not handling. Reading is cleaning. In a way, it's how you learn the shape of what you're maintaining. But the names belong to the building, and the building's relationship to those names is not one you need to understand to do your job well. The chalk drawings in room 205 are communication, but not communication directed at you. Do not erase them, add to them, or respond to them. They will disappear on their own. Your job is to clean around them. The locked rooms on the 3rd floor contain things that are aware of the difference between your cleaning attention and your investigative attention. Stay in your lane. Clean the hallways. Do not test handles. Leave the 4th floor before 3 a.m., not approximately 3 before 3. Manage your time accordingly. Empty the wastebasket in the 4th floor room every night. Every night. It doesn't matter what's in it. The act matters. If you hear your name in the building, look for the face first. Don't respond before you see the face. This will feel strange the first few times, and then it will become ordinary. Most things in this building become ordinary if you let them. Return the cart to the utility closet by 5:45. Here is the thing I want to say that the rules don't contain, because rules are behavioral guides, and this is something else. The building is taking care of something. 41 people at last count, who found something here that they didn't find anywhere else, and who are continuing to find it, and who have been here for 11 years or 47 years or 112 years, and who are, I believe this, though I can't prove it. Okay, they are enrolled. They are continuing. The building holds its enrollment with a specificity and consistency that I, over 11 months, have come to recognize as something like devotion. Your job is to support that holding, not to examine it, not to intervene in it, not to bring it into contact with the outside world, just to maintain the physical space around it, with enough care and precision that the building can keep doing what it does. That's the whole job. It's a good job. It pays well. The hours are consistent. The building is mostly quiet, and the 4th floor carpet absorbs your footsteps in a way that I've come to find genuinely peaceful. And some nights, usually between 2 and 3 a.m., in the good stretch before you need to clear the upper floors, you can feel the building's full attention on what it's doing, and it doesn't feel threatening. It feels like witnessing something concentrated. Something that has been going on for a long time and intends to keep going on, and that needs someone to empty the wastebasket, wipe down the whiteboards, and mop the hallways with enough care that it doesn't have to think about those things. Be that person. Do the work. Trust the rules before you understand them, and you'll understand them faster than I did. One last thing. Daniel Reyes. He's 6th from the bottom now. His duration number is 4. He came here on his own, enrolled on his own, and whatever the building offered him, he accepted it on his own. And whatever he's doing in those classrooms, whatever they're all doing in those classrooms, he's been doing it for 4 years. Continuously. With enough specificity to have a preferred desk and probably a preferred seat in the reading room, and maybe a preferred time to do whatever it is he does in there. I looked him up once. I thought about calling him. I didn't. And I am not telling you not to care about him, because caring about the people on that sheet is, I think, part of what makes someone right for this job. But caring about them and interfering with them are different things, and the building enforces that distinction, and you'll be better off accepting it before the building teaches it to you the hard way. They're okay. I think they're okay. I'm asking you to trust me on this. The way I'm asking you to trust all of it, not because you have evidence, but because the person before me trusted it, and the person before them trusted it, and the building is still running, and the sheet still has 41 names on it, and every night someone empties the wastebasket and nothing has broken. Keep it from breaking. Welcome to the Halverson Annex. The cart is stocked. The task sheet is on the handle. The 4th floor needs to be done before 3. Do good work. M.